Welcome back and to Make It Conscious and this series on mapping the shadow. So today's episode is provisionally called Type and Tarot. So this is where we're going to get a bit practical with this shadow map model and talk about how it can apply to things like personality type, Myers-Briggs, for example, how it can apply to symbols, most notably the tarot. And so I'm going to be sharing some ideas here on how you can actually use this model to understand yourself better, understand symbols better, understand cognitive functions better, and how they show up in both light and dark forms, and also how you can use these to deduce aspects of your own shadow map and your own psychological dynamics. So it might be appropriate here just to give another brief introduction to the shadow map itself. Not too much theory here. Let's just talk about what this actually does and how you can apply this and why it's useful. So like I said, it's really a simple map of inner dynamics. And the first thing that it maps is duality. Very simply, we all understand what duality is. We all understand the difference between white and black. We all understand the difference between in-breath and out-breath, up and down, life and death. So there's this very basic duality that exists at the heart of everything we do and experience. And as I said in the last episode, I discussed about how this duality is actually a fundamental feature of mind itself. And so beyond that, we have a sort of second level, if you like, of duality, which is, well, what is the flavor in which this is turning up? How is it that I like to be? If you have learned to be very efficient in your daily life, maybe this is a way that you adapted as a child. Well, there's a certain personality quality that you have. Let's take a personality type example. Let's take someone like the INTP, who leads with introverted thinking in the Myers-Briggs system. So someone who is very logical, they prefer to use logic as a way to make decisions. They use that logic primarily internally or subjectively, so they're making decisions based on how things make sense to them logically and subjectively. And they're also using intuition to explore the world and encounter newness, and then relaying that back to their inner system and structure that they're developing. So INTPs love theories, they love models. If you're an INTP, what do you think of this model? Let me know if you like it. If you're an INTP, you've probably already found countless aspects of it that you think could be improved, and that's great because there's a theme to this model and what I teach here, which is that it's just a model. It's a way for you to think, and so it's mapping out this duality and various ways in which this duality can come about. And so then there's the case of how anything that you take forward, any thesis, any movement or tendency, anything, a thesis can be absolutely anything. It can be a preference, it can be a persona, it can be a personality trait, it can be an idea, a person, anything. It too is going to have both a light and a dark side. And I've called these the conscious thesis and the power position. So in the case of INTP, you take that to its extreme, it's still an INTP. But if you take something like rational thought, it's not necessarily an INTP. No, actually, let's switch up. Let's go to introverted thinking. That is an INTP quality. If you take introverted thinking, great, nothing wrong with that. But if you take that to its complete extreme, it insists upon itself, it becomes alienated. It tries to be nothing but introverted thinking. Now, the thing is that introverted thinking would not even exist if it wasn't for feeling of some kind. Whether you want to think about whether that's introverted feeling or extroverted feeling, there's two ways of looking at it. But in terms of its flavor opposite here, we're talking about introverted feeling. Again, you could use extroverted feeling here. For the sake of this map, I'm talking about introverted feeling. So taken to its absolute maximum, its maximum point of development even, it becomes used in service of power. As I defined in the last episode, power is really how we adapt, respond, and maintain existence against the forces of the unknown. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's actually necessary. That was a key point of the previous episode. This is a fundamental, necessary feature of mind, that each singled out piece of mind must be taken to its development, its maximum development. But that can also become a problem, needless to say. In fact, it's actually the source of all problems, that certain things get left out. Things become one-sided, and then beyond a certain point, they become self-contradictory. And then beyond a point after that, they become dissonant and distorted and malignant. So even this feature, this introverted thinking, taken to its extreme, becomes used in service of power, for better or worse. So then, going back to the basic map, what that means is that there's something left out. Whatever it was that the conscious position and the power position left out in order to be what it needs to be, creates a shadow. And this is more of an energetic opposite as opposed to a mere absence of something. Well, it's both actually, but it also creates an energetic opposite. And this is the way Jung seemed to go later in his life as well. He started to talk about how it wasn't a mere privation of something. The shadow is not merely the absence of something, as you might surmise it to be, based on, well, the fact that a shadow is, in real life, is just based on the fact that a shadow literally just means an absence of light. But in terms of our psychology, the shadow is not merely an absence of something. It's actually both. And this is something I try to illustrate with the shadow map. So Hegel actually talks about an idea called determinate negation, which means that whatever is taken to its extreme creates its own internal contradiction. So introverted thinking as a tool wants to be what? It wants to be rational. It wants to think. It wants to get things right. It wants to know the answer. And it's pretty good at that. But if it falls in love with itself, and then you have this image of something that we call introverted thinking, it's really an idea, it's a label. Okay, so we pursue that. The mind pursues this thing, this introverted thinking. It's getting right, it's getting rewards, it's acing all of its maths tests, it's top of the class, it's building all these theories, it becomes enamored with itself, believes it has the absolute truth, perhaps. And then what happens? It's no longer the very thing it set out to be. It becomes wrapped up in its own particulars. Because you cannot truly be right, not truly, unless you've also accounted for feeling. So there's a problem here, because not all introverted thinking is the same. In fact, if you take it to its extreme, it becomes distorted and dark and self-serving. It's kind of like no longer really introverted thinking. It looks like it has all the signs of it. It's getting all the tests right. It might appear to be logically sound within its own bounds, but it cannot be truly logical unless it also accounts for that which it is left out. So it gets met with this incredible paradox, where the more right it becomes, actually the more it starts to miss the mark. And so you have this effect that Jung talked about called enantiodromia, where things become their opposites. So actually, introverted thinking kind of becomes a kind of feeling in the end, taken to its extreme. And what it really needs, in order to be what it truly is, the notion that it's carrying, it actually needs the very thing it's left out. So there is this, not only a privation of something, there is this self-generated contradiction where the thing itself destroys itself because it no longer can be the thing it wants to be. So it must become outmoded, it must deteriorate, it must morph and transform into something else. And so every idea taken to its extreme generates its own inner contradiction, its own determinate negation. And so, yes, there's an absence there, but what is energy? This other feature of this model here, this energetic feature. Well, energy is just, we've modeled it with endless equations and thermodynamics and the theories of relativity and so on. Yeah, we understand how it moves, we understand what it looks like, we understand that it cannot be created or destroyed, only converted. But what actually is it, and why does it exist? Well, it's just things having to remain non-contradictory at their essence. Because if you set fire to petrol in your car engine, it's not just going to disappear and, not give off any heat. Like, it has to give off heat. Because to not give off heat, well, the universe would have to contradict itself to do that at an essential level. Contradiction is everywhere. It's one of the key features of our world. But it's also a question of moving back to non-contradiction at essence. So, the self is non-contradictory, and yet it must split in order to know itself, and that creates these contradictions that must be reconciled. So, this is why that true thinking actually includes feeling, and true feeling includes thinking. If it doesn't, it's not true feeling. If thinking doesn't include feeling, it's not really true thinking. It's not what I would call true thinking. It is thinking, but it's not at one with the thing it's trying to be. It's sort of trying to figure out what it really means to be logical and what it really means to think. Because thinking is a function of the mind. But it's doing that in a way that's trying to leave out certain things. So the other aspect of this model is that, as I've alluded to, it's pointing to an inherent wholeness to things, to everything, to any idea. And so this also creates this need for things to come back to center, things to come back to self. So the self, and you can think of this as also spirit, it follows a similar path. There's this like magnetic pull back to center, and the more alienated something becomes from it, the more it's going to have to contend with an opposing force. So then, talked about a little bit about type there and cognitive functions. Let's do another one. And we're going to look at plenty more examples here. Let's come back to this one, the INFJ. Are there any people with INFJ preferences here listening or watching? So I'll say from the outset here that I do think that type can be a very useful tool. I myself am qualified as a type professional, and so I've personally found it very useful. It's another model, and like any model, for the reasons I've been discussing here, pretty much the moment it becomes useful, it also becomes a trap. Because the very idea of INFJ is just an idea. And if you've ever been to any type-based meetups or attended any type-based talks or classes and met other people of your type, maybe several in the same room at the same time, you'll see just how different individuals from the same so-called type can be. So, you could get 5 INFJs together in the room and they'll be completely different. And this is one reason I also like to use symbolism, especially the tarot and my tarot birth chart service that I use based on Michael Zarian's taroscopic system, to really understand and symbolize some of these differences that exist between people, and help you sort of sense and understand some of the subtler, finer differences that exist. So what's going on here is that, okay, so you have preferences for INFJ, introversion, intuition, feeling and judging. But in terms of what that means for your functions, that means that you lead with what's called introverted intuition, and you back that up with extroverted feeling. So again, 2 ways of operating, experiencing inner patterns and having almost like a sixth sense for what's likely to unfold, feeling the mood of a room. Like an INFJ might say they can walk into a room and immediately sense what's going on and how the people are doing, and they back that up with this extroverted feeling. And this is to say nothing about the level of development, by the way. That's key. So in principle, someone with INFJ preferences can then use their sensitivity to feeling and what helps people get their emotional needs met to make good, wholesome decisions that serve them and serve the group. But as I've pointed out on the map here, INFJ also has an extreme and a power position. So the very same label doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad or wholesome or unwholesome or used in a skillful way or a mature way or a way that's being done with good intentions. And the difference between whether it's being well developed or not, and whether it's also being used for good or negative intentions. There's definitely some overlap there. Like, it's pretty hard to develop something really well and not use it for good intentions, because, well, the very definition of wholesome intention would be something that doesn't contradict itself. And so if it's being used in a way that is self-contradictory, it necessarily means there's something left out there in terms of its development. Maybe not necessarily in terms of the certain aspects that are being used, because remember, it's isolated, it's alienated. But in terms of wholeness itself, there's definitely plenty left out there. And so you take that to its extreme, it just becomes a higher volume or even a less wholesome version of itself. And so the very thing that the INFJ needs in order to realize itself might be something like the ESTP. So someone with ESTP preferences not only has the direct opposite 4-letter code, so that's extrovert, sensing, thinking, perceiving, but they also have the same cognitive functions in the reverse order. So again, if you're not sure what that means, it simply means that the thing that the INFJ struggles with the most is what the ESTP does best. That would be extroverted sensing. So this sort of virtuoso ability to be with the physical environment, to understand the physical world, usually with a great deal of physical finesse, to be very in tune to the physical body and what's happening around you, to like getting into action and being physical and being comfortable with physical experience and not disturbed by little aches and pains and this kind of thing. So it's really to do with the level of development, the level of conscious awareness, and the level of certainty in the use of these functions. So what you see by contrast with the INFJ is often someone who is quite uncomfortable with sensory experience. And that might be because their natural intuition relies on having a very peaceful or minimal sensory input in order for it to do its best work. When the INFJ is just being bombarded with noise and maybe physical pain or undesirable scents or smells, tastes, it interferes potentially with their very dominant function. So it prevents them from maybe doing their best work until the point that they're actually able to develop a relationship with that side of themselves. It's called the inferior function. It's that part of them which is directly opposite to the way they like to show up. Therefore, what the ESTP does really well is actually not only very repulsive, undesirable to the INFJ, but it also actually contains the very thing they need to become whole in themselves. So you can see here how these opposites play out together, the dynamics that exist. So if you know your type preferences, you can simply mark those here. But let's move on now to a discussion of the tarot. It's important we get to that. And so I'm just going to show you on screen briefly here an example of a tarot birth chart. So this is a service that I offer, and I do these on a regular basis for people. So you can think of this as like an astrological chart, kind of, but using tarot cards. And it doesn't stop there. It doesn't only use astrology. It also uses numerology and Kabbalah as well. So it actually incorporates all four of the traditional divination arts. So the chart I'm sharing here is one for Diana, Princess of Wales. She was a Cancer, and she's signified by the Chariot. So I'll just highlight one or two things from this. Firstly, she was the quintessential Queen of Cups, or Princess of Cups. And she actually passed away around astrological midlife, which occurs around the age of 36. And so it's kind of interesting and not coincidence, I believe, that she was referred to as the Princess of Hearts. That's what I meant to say, Princess of Hearts. But of course, in the tarot, hearts and cups, or cups, are analogous to the hearts in the traditional playing card deck. So cups often associated with emotion, feeling, and the inner world of feeling. And the other thing, of course, is you see the Chariot card everywhere on this chart. It appears 3 times, which is quite unusual for a birth chart. Often you get things appearing twice, but 3 times is particularly unusual. But one thing I'll note about the Chariot here, it's a widely misunderstood card, And it's often thought of as like a card that's quite masculine, quite victorious, but it's not quite accurate. It's actually the card of Cancer. Like I said, it's actually associated with the moon, and it's more of a feminine card. But here, though, you can see clearly that you have this charioteer, this hard outer shell protecting an inner world. And symbolically, this shows up often in things like cars, driving, and Princess Diana, what does she do? She went out into minefields wearing this protective bomb suit. That's a very Cancerian image. So when you're working with these symbols, you really got to think beyond the sort of exoteric magazine horoscope. Oh, you will encounter a difficulty with your relationship on Tuesday. No, that's not how this stuff works. But you can tune into the more subtle, esoteric ways in which these symbols show up in the lives of people. You can start to develop a perception or perceptivity for how these symbols play out. And this is something I do with clients all the time, and we look at certain aspects of their chart and map them to the shadow map. And so this is where you can really start piecing apart what some of these symbols mean. So let's do a couple here then. Let's look at, for example, the Fool. The first card, card 0 and card 22. 0 being not so much a number here, more a sigil. So the Fool is both the start and the end of the journey of the major arcana. And so it makes sense to talk about it first, because rightly so, the Fool here is situated in the center of the shadow map, symbolizing the fact that he is the start and the end. And so you take this notion of Fool, what does it symbolize? Well, in a positive sense, it might symbolize originality, the origin of something, independence, going your own way, and yes, freedom. As Hegel said, the history of the world is nothing less than the history of the consciousness of freedom. So the Fool is all about freedom. I mean, look at his image. He doesn't have a care in the world, and yet he's about to fall off a cliff. And is that a problem? Well, he doesn't seem to think so. But did he get to where he was without falling off a few cliffs? You can see the mountains behind him symbolizing the fact that he's got many more trials and tribulations ahead. But is he at the end or the start? It is very interesting that he seems carefree now, but even though he also represents the end of the journey, he's still carefree. He's discovered himself. This is that process of mind coming to know itself. And what it comes to know in doing that is the very mind that's knowing. So, nonetheless, this too has a dark side. So you can start splitting these ideas apart, splitting these symbols apart. And the first step is really to understand the conscious thesis and the power position, or these two zones here. So what is the positive aspect of this energy, this symbol? And what is the negative aspect of this energy? Not the opposite. That's something else. What is the positive and negative, or the higher magnitude, or the misuse of that same energy? Whether it's used too much, whether it's undeveloped and heedless, whether it's being deliberately used for malignant ends. What does that look like? Well, here we might have foolishness, obviously, just not taking heed, not meeting with limitation, not adequately taking heed of your own self-generated negation, the very consequences that you create through your own exploration, through trying things, your own self-contradiction, and meeting with limitation in the world, just wishing there was no limitation. It cannot exist, because limitation is the product of freedom. It's contained within it. So foolishness, leading us into all kinds of unbearable struggles, carelessness, leading to situations we'd rather avoid if we had the wisdom going in, and of course immaturity. So the lack of development of this energy. But what is it that the Fool actually encounters in going on this journey? Well, it's things like I've shown on the left side of the screen here in the shadow position. You've got tradition. He's generally not too keen on that, but he can probably tolerate it to some extent. Cooperation, yeah, okay, fine. Limitation. These are all the things that he has to meet and assimilate with in order to truly develop originality, independence, and freedom. Because, true originality is not just like, imagine an artist like, say, Jackson Pollock. He wasn't just randomly scattering paint. It might look like that to some people, but that wasn't what he was doing at all. He was operating within certain bounds, certain structures. And so the best form of art is that which dances with limitation. It must do, in order for something to become realized and made real. But then it too, this shadow side, of course, has a dark side. And that would be narrow-mindedness, dependence on others, on the world, not willing to take a leap, not willing to move forward and embrace individuality. And of course, self-sacrifice. Like, I'm so holy that I'm just going to sacrifice myself for others. And of course, that too, because remember, it's way over on the extreme, it's way over to the shadow position. That too contains its own contradiction. Because if you sacrifice yourself, you're no good to anybody. So it's complete nonsense to say that you're sacrificing yourself for other people. Beyond the point. I mean, there's sacrifices that need to be made. But if you take that idea to its very extreme, it's no longer helping people at all. Okay, so there's one way in which you can use this model to understand how symbols like tarot cards can mean many different things. If they show up in readings, they might have positive, negative, or reversed associations. And the reversal itself might also contain hidden good, hidden gold and advice. But even the upright position in a reading can have both positive and negative associations. In fact, if you want to find a really good resource for learning the meanings and understanding the meanings of these cards, I recommend Path of the Fool by Michael Sarin. It's a great reference guide for all cards. So let's look at the moon now, card 18. So conventionally, the moon might be associated with the unconscious. It's associated with Pisces. It's about the contact with the great unknown, the permeability of mind. And so it's associated with intuition, sensitivity to hidden forces. And from that, of course, comes a kind of creativity, an ability potentially to channel the forces of the unconscious. But if you take that to its extreme, well, it doesn't take too much imagination to see how that could become a kind of fragility, a kind of susceptibility to your own mind, not least unrealistic tendencies, not being grounded in material reality, not grasping how things might work in the world of physicality and finance and livelihood, perhaps, unless you could find a way to integrate the two, of course. Maybe even paranoia, maybe even your mind telling you all kinds of stories about what things mean. Impracticality, we've pretty much covered that. So again, every one of these symbols is bivalent. It contains both wholesome and unwholesome aspects. It can show up in both a positive and a negative form. I hope the noise out my window today is not drowning out my voice too much. It's okay, we can deal with that. So, but then if we were to look at the shadow of this card, you see, because I would not consider the shadow to be those excessive qualities or those negative qualities. I would consider, at least in terms of this model, the shadow to be the opposite. So the very fact that it has intuition and sensitivity and creates potentially the potential for fragility and paranoia and impracticality creates the need for something else. And what is that thing that it needs? Well, it might be something like being down to earth, grounded, practical. In order for the energy of this card to truly become real and manifest itself, it can no longer just fall in love with the idea of itself. It has to take on board some of its shadow, being down to earth and so on, being in touch with the material world around it, the world of form, the immediately concrete and available. But of course, if that's taken to its extreme, it might become insensitive, banal, it might lack insight, or even just be completely closed-minded to anything other than the material world. Like the material is all there is kind of mentality. So we've looked at just two there. I think I will leave it there. We might well come back to some of these. If any of you would like to see more of this kind of content, you'd like to maybe see a discussion of any particular tarot card, then by all means let me know. If you're interested in a birth chart report, head over to makeitconscious.com, and you can actually use your chart in combination with this map to understand some of the dynamics of your own mind in a little bit more detail. So with that said, I will leave that there, and I'll thank you for your time and attention, and I'll see you in the next episode.